You can catch Michigan Wolverines live right here at the Voice of College Football over on the Michigan channel every Tuesday and Thursday night. Of course, I'm the guy that started the whole thing, but so every so often I'd like to jump in and talk to Michigan football. And we got one of the very best here to do it. So a bit of a special edition for 15 or 20 minutes. So if you've got a comment or question, please leave those in the chat. We got Isaiah Hole here from Wolverines Wire, also Locked On Wolverines podcast that comes your way each and every day. Isaiah, good to see you as always, sir.
Good to see you too. Sorry it's taken so long to get this going. In season, I'm probably the worst person at handling my own schedule. Just it's a terrible at getting out everything together. So every week you're like, when this week? And I'm like, I don't know. And then there's some days where I'm like, yeah, I probably could have made that happen. And some weeks where I'm like, yeah, I can't even breathe. So,
but that's the caveat, Isaiah. When you can deliver otherwise, then you can, be a pain in the rear end otherwise, because, you've got the goods, and that's what it's all about. So, hey, you've always been good to me and good to us. So great to see you as always. Well, let's talk some Michigan football. This is what strikes me about some of the recent performances against middling teams, to be kind. Purdue, Michigan State, Wisconsin. Forget 20, 21, 22, 23 Michigan standard. Even the Jim Harbaugh editions of 2015 through 19 would kick around the dregs of the Big Ten by 4 and 5 touchdowns, typically. These are not impressive performances. However, I watch them, but I also look at the box score, and most of the time it looks like a Michigan box score. They're ramming it down their throats in the run game. They're playing really good defense, limiting these teams to low yardage totals, typically taking the time of possession. And so just what are your thoughts about these 1 and 2 score wins against the likes of Michigan State, Wisconsin, and now this past game against Purdue?
So you mentioned 2021. I've been bringing that up a lot in the last couple of weeks because that year actually it's not unlike. And sorry, my dog has decided this is a playtime since I just got home. But I think that that year is not dissimilar in some ways. Because I think we kind of memory hole how that year actually went in a lot of ways, because you look at it and you say like, well, yeah, they absolutely blew the doors off of Ohio State, and they really blew the doors off of Iowa, and then went to the college football playoff, and it just kind of ended that way. I mean, it started with that Maryland game, but before that Maryland game in 2021, it wasn't completely dissimilar. Now, they were a little bit more dominant in games like against Indiana or against Northwestern, but generally, like, they weren't really like wins to write home about outside of the directional that it played at the directional schools at the beginning of the season, which was Western Michigan and UConn, I think, was the other group of 5 team they played. Those 2 games they dominated, blew teams out, but then you get to that Rutgers game at the beginning of the year. And keep in mind, 2021 was a really bad Rutgers team, really bad. It wasn't like what we kind of think of Rutgers today as being kind of like, yeah, they can kind of get there.
I remember that game.
Yeah, and it took them literally the entire game to beat them. I think the difference is instead of just one of those, you've got like 2 or 3 of those. I don't know if I'd count Michigan State this year as that. Because, I mean, that game was going to be 31-13 if it wasn't for a garbage time touchdown there at the very end. But Purdue and, to some degree, Wisconsin as well. Yeah, because it's all 3 of the games, Michigan dominated the box score, but didn't dominate the score itself. So one of the things that I've been long concerned about this Michigan team, dating back to last year, was kind of a lack of killer instinct, right? Because like you mentioned, Jim Harbaugh's teams would win so handily in a lot of the games. Although most of the games, it's funny seeing Michigan fans melt down at halftime. It's like, oh, they're tied with whoever it might be. It's like, yeah, that's just kind of how it always has been, right? Like they have not usually been a quick out of the gate team, but they aren't finishing with touchdowns. And that's weirdly kind of always been something that we've talked about, but that was usually because they were finishing with field goals, and they're not doing either right now. And that's been kind of an issue, is just not finishing drives. Last week against Purdue, I mean, that game was on the verge of being blown open, but then you had the 2 Bryce Underwood turnovers within the 5-yard line, right? Like that's not great. You know, they had opportunities against Wisconsin and they didn't finish them. Michigan State was just kind of a weird game, and one of those types of games where I just looked at it and said, you just want to get out of there with a win, no matter how you can do it, right? Like it's always a weird game in one way or another. So they need to find a way to be more consistent is really the big thing. I know people want to say, you know, different things. People want to panic. We have a mutual friend that loves doing that. I don't see it that way, because I see that they're getting better at a lot of different things, but it's kind of one of those things, you plug one hole, another one springs up. And, you know, like my concern is just that there's the inconsistency. It's not one thing. I know people want to look and say the pass game's been bad for 2 games. Fine, fair. But generally, like coming into these last 2 games, Bryce Underwood had the best game that he's had so far in a Michigan uniform. He was electric. He was consistent. He was decisive. So, and it was against good competition. It's not like he did it against mediocre competition. So with that, I look at it and say, all right, like we know he can do it against good competition. The fact that he didn't do it, that he couldn't do it against bad competition doesn't scare me as much, because we've seen him do it against a Washington. We've seen him do it against a bad team but a good defense in Wisconsin. You know, like, so if you're not doing it against Purdue, who had some interesting things that they did in the game plan, just seeing how, you know, that they were bringing, you know, blitzes of 6 quite often and really keeping him off balance. And, you know, other teams might try to replicate that, but they also didn't do some of the things that usually they do that make him have success in the last 2 games. They didn't really use as much of the boot game as we've seen in previous weeks, and we know that's what Michigan wants to run. So with all of that, I kind of say, all right, we know that they can do some things that they haven't even tried to do. Against Michigan State, they didn't even really try to throw the ball in the second half, right? Like, people get mad at me for saying this, like, oh, like, you know, I'm not as concerned about the passing game because they didn't try to throw the football. They're like, oh, how dare you? Like they attempted 2 passes in the second half. I don't know what else to tell you. They didn't try. It's not that they couldn't, they just didn't try at that point. So they're figuring out that they can do things in the run game that they maybe weren't able to do early in the season. So kind of to go the long way around to get back to your point, you have a team that is able to win in a similar way that it was able to in 2021. And sometimes it's going to come with the same types of wins that you had that year that people are somewhat memory holding, right? Like, yes, they ended up beating Wisconsin on the road for the first time in 20 years. But like, what was that Wisconsin team? It wasn't like the Wisconsin team that was winning Big Ten championships, or at least, going to the Big Ten championship game. It was closer to the version we see now than the version that it was before then. Well, it was able to go out and beat Nebraska on the road again in a late game win, but it wasn't that wasn't even a good Nebraska team at all, right? So I think that with a young team is going to come inconsistency. So it's good timing to have this bye week so that they can evaluate, that they can kind of rep some certain things to try to get them back on track. And I think that with that, like, yeah, I agree with anyone who says if they play like this, they won't win any of the last 3 games, or if they play like this in any of the last 3 games, they won't win. Yeah, I fully agree. They won't. But we've seen the offense just be so close. And I don't know that people see it that way, but it is very close, right? Like it's doing 90% of the things right, but it's not doing that other 10% quite often. So I think that if they can find that in the bye week, get a little healthier, I think that they'll be in good shape.
So more specific to Bryce Underwood, you know, I remember discussing with Steve Dace after the Washington win, which to me is the aberration of the season, because I set it up with all the lackluster performances against the bottom of the Big Ten. There's also the three legitimate opponents, Oklahoma, USC, and Washington. And obviously Washington was the really good showing at home, winning by 17. And Bryce Underwood, what he showed me in that game was what he had showed me the entire season, but just more of it, meaning pretty consistent, especially for a true freshman quarterback, but also showing those 3 or 4 moments a game where you're like, that's the guy. That's the number one quarterback in the country. Hardly anybody makes that throw. And he did that a few times against Washington. And it just seems like the last couple of weeks, there's been regression, which we all know progress doesn't go in a straight line all the time. So I don't know that there's any concern there.
Not particularly, because you can kind of see why. It's the pass protection. And this kind of stems from my conversation with Connor today that's not up yet. But the pass protection, it's not that it's bad, but it's like there's a disconnect between what Bryce seems to be expecting versus what's actually happening. And that has caused him to have happy feet. And sometimes it is because there's missed assignments or other guys don't know. Connor highlighted this play where Jasper Parker, instead of taking this last week, instead of taking the guy he should have taken, first off, as Connor noted, he should have switched sides, and but then he didn't, and then so he ended up going and taking a guy who was already taken rather than the free blitzer coming in the other end, and that caused Bryce to have not just happy feet, he was running for his life immediately and got rid of the football, and it ends up being, you look at it and it's like, okay, an errant throw. Didn't put it where he's supposed to be. And you can kind of see that throughout. If you rewatch the Purdue game, a lot of not setting his feet, not doing the types of things that we've kind of seen him do up until that game for the most part. So it's kind of harkens back to one of the things I've been saying for the last 2 weeks. Each and every game is its own vignette. So they have to find a way to get on the same page. Bryce Underwood and Greg Crippen especially. And Greg Crippen is certainly, if they're going to have young running backs in, or any running backs in pass protection, they've got all these freshmen that are playing, redshirt freshmen on the offensive line while they're doing great run blocking. There's just those small missed assignments that happen, that are causing some issues here and there in the pass game. But you see, generally, it's not one of those scenarios where it's like, well, that guy out there right now is a turnstile. That isn't it. It's more someone just kind of missing their one assignment on any given play, and that's accelerating Bryce's timing. And we didn't see that as much earlier in the year, even though the pass game wasn't necessarily great. But at the same time, one of the ways you negate that is by running bootlegs, which Michigan was doing kind of constantly. And they've kind of gotten away from that, because even against USC, that game really wasn't on Bryce, right? I mean, he did throw the untimely pick. He couldn't finish drives, but was still able to kind of drive the field quite often. I think he had 204 yards in that game, a touchdown and an interception. But that game was more on the defense, right? So if you can even just get him back to that, where it's like, yeah, he's going to make a critical mistake like he did with the interception in that game, but he's also going to drive the field. And then you just hope that you put yourself in a position where you can at least kick some field goals, finish some drives with some points. Then they're probably in a good spot. But the last couple of weeks, yeah, it looks like regression. And in some ways it is, because suddenly it doesn't feel like everyone's on the same page in terms of the pass protection, and that's accelerated Bryce's game. But to me, it is less of it's less of his inability to throw, right? Like, it's not like he's got a mechanical issue. He's making some poor decisions, but those poor decisions are coming because he's feeling accelerated. If they can find a way to slow things down for him again, to kind of how it was even against like Oklahoma. I mean, he didn't have a great game against Oklahoma, but it didn't feel like the game was too fast for him either. Whereas the last couple games, yeah, it kind of feels like that's been the case. So they got to figure out how to be able to give him a little bit more of a beat back there than they're giving him. And part of that might just be going back to the bootleg game, because then, they can run lots of different things off of that. But when it comes to the drop back game, which they clearly are trying to get him more comfortable in, there's been some issues as far as the protections, or at least in Bryce's head, sometimes there's some issues to the protections, and he's felt like, okay, I gotta escape, I gotta bail, I gotta do whatever. So it's getting him back to feeling comfortable, feeling decisive, so that you don't have those same issues that we saw against Purdue in particular, again, against Northwestern, Maryland, and Ohio State.
Isaiah Hull is here to break down the Maize and Blue. Wolverines Wire is your destination, as well as Locked On Wolverines with Isaiah each and every day. So on the defensive side, against Purdue, no Jimmy Rolder, no Cole Sullivan, Jay-Sean Barham knocked out in the first quarter. Do we have an update on those three and anyone else?
Sounds like I don't know anything on Cole. Sounds like Rolder wouldn't, it sounds like he'll miss, obviously, I was going to say he'll miss the bye week. I don't know what I'm talking about. Sounds like he might be back after the bye week. Jay-Sean doesn't sound like it's that serious either. Cole Sullivan, haven't really gotten an update on him. I think that is that pretty much the big defensive guys. I think, I don't think that they're missing really anyone else. I think, too, though, that's where it can be a blessing in disguise to some degree when you see that you see so many young players playing. One of the reasons why my lack of concern to some degree comes from what Michigan did in that game, right? Like, they still had, 3 linebackers available to them, and you can just roll with what you've got, right? Like, you don't have to go with all kinds of rotations. And yet really early, Michigan was like, let's start throwing Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng and Chase Taylor out there. Let's throw Lugard Adebayo out there. And when you start doing that, like, that kind of tells you, guys who haven't really played, and like, I feel like that's kind of a little cavalier to some degree, but it kind of shows your level of confidence that, hey, we can get the job done even with guys who haven't played. Like, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng has not played outside of garbage time yet because he was injured early in the season. So to get those guys in, it's kind of invaluable to do so against Purdue, because you don't want to, if you find yourself in a situation where Jimmy Rolder, Cole Sullivan, and Jay-Sean Barham, you say they return and get banged up again, or Ernest gets banged up, and you're playing Ohio State, and suddenly you got to throw out one of those young guys where they don't feel like they're completely thrown to the wolves. I think of Jaden Sanders, right? Like, he played a little bit in the season opener in garbage time, looked awful. He got thrown to the wolves against Oklahoma, and there were several big plays that were given up specifically by him. But then as he got his feet wet against Nebraska in a very good passing game, he held his own. So to be able to get some of those guys in now, I think that can pay some dividends down the line. And I guess it's just whether it's Purdue, who actually has a good offense, or you can maybe live without Jimmy Rolder and Cole Sullivan against, and Jay-Sean Barham even against a Northwestern who doesn't necessarily have the most prolific offense, right? But you're going to need them for Maryland, and you're going to need them for Ohio State, those other guys. So it'll be interesting to see what Michigan does from a strategy standpoint, to say, like, we can get some of these guys some time now, just in case. But I think that you'll see at least 2, if not all 3 of them back, at least in some limited capacity here in the next week.
2 quick questions, Isaiah, for you via the chat here. John D'Adamo, who hosts our Michigan show on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Does Chip Lindsey need to be on the sideline with Bryce?
I don't think it matters, because he's not. I mean, I know that one of the things that's touted is that he helped develop Drake May, but he's not really a quarterback's coach, so I don't think it matters that much. It's less, again, to me, about Bryce as much as it's Bryce and the offensive linemen being on the same page. So they need to figure out how to get that to happen. And I don't think it matters whether or not Chip's up in the booth, because he can talk to Bryce, right? Like, this isn't like a couple years ago where it's like, yeah, you have to wait until between drives and get on the phone. Like, he's in his year as it is, with the helmet communications.
Blue Wolverine, thank you for the question and the contribution here. And before you answer this question, Isaiah, I want to say, as a guy that's got no stake in the Michigan football team, I did not understand. This was against Washington. Okay, we know what Samaj Morgan's issues have been this season. It's 4th and 1 at midfield. Okay, if you want to get Samaj Morgan jump started, why don't you do this on 1st down, 2nd down, 3rd down even? But it's 4th and 1, and they flip him that little pass, and he's got no one within 50 yards of him, and he drops it. And I'm thinking, yes, that's not good on Samaj Morgan. Obviously, he's a wide receiver with a scholarship at the University of Michigan. Catch a 3-yard pass. However, why call that for Samaj Morgan when you know the issues he has and he's not the most reliable guy, and you do this on 4th down? It just seemed like a bad play call to me.
I agree. And I agree. That's what I said at the time. As far as, listen, I got to preface this by saying I love Samaj, one of my favorite players that I get to cover. I love his family. He's got to be better. He's been awful throughout a lot of the year. And I put a lot of that on the coaches because they're not putting him in, like you just said, they're not putting him in a position to succeed. And on punt return, I'm not really sure what they're coaching him to do, because it feels like you could throw any of us into a game and we'd understand the situation better than he seems to in the moment. And, whether it's fair catching at the 5, letting one go over his head when there's no one around him and the ball bounces for 20, 25 yards, getting up field position, actually catching the ball and running into guys, the drops, feels like it's someone who started to be a little in over his head and now can't get out of it. I agree with what Sharon Moore has said when he says like they're going to need him this season. I do agree with that. And I'm sure they're seeing him not make these mistakes in practice. And it's kind of like I played on a softball team back in like 2007 with the improv comedy club that was in Ann Arbor. And we had like a couple practices, and in practice they would lob me the ball, and I would hit it basically like at or over the fence pretty much every time. But then you put me in at bat and I'm lining out to third, right? Like it's in an actual game. I feel like that's kind of where he's at, right? He needs to be able to settle down and be comfortable. I don't know that you have that opportunity now for the rest of the year, because you don't want to like play with fire against Ohio State and say like, okay, now's your time to shine and then lose a game because you couldn't convert on a 4th and 1 on what looks to be a pretty easy catch and run. But they got to find a way to get him comfortable in the next game or two. But they've got other options. Like Channing Goodwin was in the same spot as he was. They were pretty much synonymous as far as guys that dropped passes. And they finally kind of said, okay, Channing Goodwin, we're going to give you more time now this last game. And Samaj saw his role decrease. But you got to do something different in punt return as well, if that's the case, and try to figure it out in the offseason if you haven't figured it out by now, because it's, one game's alarming, one game is what it is, 2 games is alarming, 3 games is a trend, and this has been Samaj Morgan all season. It's not great.
Speaking of being comfortable, I know you've got to be comfortable with Jordan Marshall ever since that performance against Alabama, but comfortable with him as the lead guy and then the rest of the running back room filling in, rather than it being Justice Haynes and Marshall and then everybody else.
At the moment, based off of what we've seen in the last several games, from the USC game forward, yeah, I'd say I'm comfortable with him. I don't know about anyone behind him at this point. Kind of like where, again, I like to draw these 2021 parallels. Michigan opened the season in 2021 with it looking like Blake Corum was the lead back. And he had it was the same type of running that as Justice Haynes, right? The one cut and gone type of thing. Blake became a much different player in 22 and 23, but like in 21, they had a very similar style of play. And then he got injured mid-season, And you saw kind of in the back end, kind of similarly, Hassan Haskins turn into what he became. So I think that you see a similar running style from Jordan Marshall, the ability to fall forward. He has, I think, a little bit more speed and a little bit more ability to break things open than Hassan did. Hassan wasn't busting out super long runs per se, but he was getting, good 10, 15-yard clips here and there. So, yeah, I like what they've got going with him. I don't know if Jasper Parker or Bryson Kuzdal, because we haven't seen much of them. They talk highly of them both, but we haven't seen much of those guys yet. So it'll be interesting to see when they do need to go change of pace, how those guys do, while we wait to see if Justice can return from his foot surgery before the end of the season or not. But I think with what you're starting to see from Jordan, I was, I think, the most yards from a running back in like 30 years this last game that he had. I could be misspeaking there, but I feel like the 185 yards, that was extremely impressive that he was able to do that. And it's clearly not a blip, right? We saw it against Alabama, kind of struggled earlier in the year to really get going, but then USC game forward, it seems like he's been able to be consistent, find ways to hit that hole with force and power, and do what he needs to do. So I've been very impressed by him.
Okay, Isaiah, before we let you walk, one last thing. CFP rankings came out on Tuesday. Are you the type that basically you're looking at Michigan saying, win out 10-2, beat the number 1 team or whatever they're ranked at the time, number 2 in the country, it's a playoff bid, or they lose to Ohio State, they're 9-3, there's no way they're getting in, they lost to Oklahoma, they didn't beat anyone outside of Washington, and it's pretty much cut and dry? Or are you one of those guys that's gotten into the lab against the SEC schedules and try to measure everything and figure out, well, if they're against Oklahoma and such, then this is going to happen, et cetera, et cetera?
No, I think you gotta win out to be in. I think that's how they see it too. I don't think there's any way that you get in if you don't win out. And that would even include, let's say they lose some fluky weird game against either of the next 2 teams and then beat Ohio State. Let's say they beat Ohio State handily. I don't think that'll happen, but let's just say for hypotheticals, they're still out, right? Like, I just don't think that they have a path outside of that. And in some ways that might be, like, let's say they lose to Ohio State. I think that if you can learn the right lessons from it, that can be okay. Now, no Michigan fan's going to be happy about that, but kind of in the same sense as losing to TCU in the college football playoff or Michigan State in 2021, how that kind of propels you for the future, right? Because no one was really looking at this season and saying like, yeah, this is one where they can win it all. I think people were looking at it and said that they are a fringe college football playoff type of team. I think that's fair. But no one was really looking like, yeah, they're going to make a deep run this year. I think you're more so looking the next 2 years. So whatever teaches you the right lessons, whether it's a close win or a loss or whatever, making it into the college football playoff and losing early or not making it at all. I think that can be beneficial for the next 2 years when you have a much higher ceiling than you have now compared to trying to eke in and see what you can do.
Join Isaiah's work both on Wolverines Wire and as host of Locked On Wolverines. And certainly, Isaiah, if there's anything else you want to pass along to everyone about what you've got going this week, certainly do so.
Just plugging away. If you can watch my behind the scenes on my personal YouTube from the Purdue game, just to show you what it's like. And we'll welcome on this puppy who's just been laying on my lap the entire time.
Nice. He's a good looking dog.
I think she's insane, but she's an insane puppy. She thinks crazy thoughts. But
very good, Isaiah. Great to see you, man. Always, and appreciate you being here.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right, good stuff out of Isaiah Hole, of course. And again, you see the destinations for his work down below. Appreciate John D'Adamo in particular being here for a special edition of Wolverines Live. I thought I'd label it as such since we got Isaiah today, and this was the time to knock this out. We've got the Michigan show every Tuesday and Thursday night. The call-in shows on Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. So join John and TJ on Tuesdays and Thursdays on the Michigan channel. And Jackson, thanks for keeping everyone updated on everything else going on at the Voice of College Football. We do have Michigan merch. You can catch that at vocfb.com. I'm actually going to call that up. It looks pretty good. You put together two of your favorite brands, put them together, and that would be Michigan football and the Voice of College Football. And we're pretty proud of what we put together here. It's good looking stuff, and you can catch it at vocfb.com. And it only takes about 52 clicks to get it on the screen. And there you go. We've got tumblers, we've got mugs, we've got koozies, we've got hats and tees and the like. And so again, whether it's Michigan, whether it's Ohio State, Nebraska, USC, we've got about 20 or 25 teams represented, again, including the maize and blue with tees and gear and tumblers and all of that you see displayed right there. Again, Tuesdays and Thursdays and post-game at Michigan at the Voice of College Football. So check out our work there. Let's see. We'll see me next tonight, Thursday night, 10 p.m. Eastern time for the big call-in show right here at the Voice of College Football. And we will see you then.